Hello, everybody. So happy to be connected one more time again for another Tune In Tuesday. And today's discussion that we're going to be having is all related to Indian law. This discussion is for sure dedicated to Roshni, a very dear friend of mine, who actually told me the importance of Indian law. Otherwise, I was as ignorant as the rest of us who joined this discussion. So, with me are two wonderful souls who have agreed to share their knowledge that they have related to this particular field. First up is Sushant. Sushant is a law graduate and owns his own firm today. He is experienced and an expert in banking, civil, consumer, corporate, commercial, and IPR, labor, real estate, succession and inheritance, and tax litigation laws. He also undertakes verification and scrutiny of title to properties and contributes in various other aspects as well. I've been talking to him, and I think just over the last 2 days, he's made me a little more, sensible in terms of law. Thank you so much, Sushant, for joining us, and thank you for giving us your time.
I think, thank you for this opportunity.
Next person with us is Abhilesh. Abhilesh is also a law graduate and is practicing for the last 8 years. He specializes in dispute resolution and handles various types of litigations, corporate and commercial matters, petitions, arbitrations, consumer disputes, and white collar crimes. He also represents various MNCs and institutions before commercial courts, magistrates courts, civil courts, high courts, and Supreme Court of India. Thank you so much, Abhilesh, once again for giving us your time and being here today.
Thank you, Kripalini. Thanks for hosting us. It's a
Thank
great
you
honor, I
so
would
much.
say.
Yeah, thank you so much because I actually never knew that we all as citizens of India need to know so much about law. I've been I think I should say I'm very guilty of being dependent on my parents for all the government and all the law related matters, and I never thought it was important unless Roshni spoke to me about this. And she said, you know what, as citizens and whatever age group that we belong to, we need to know a lot of things. So thank you for joining us. And the last 2 days, like I said, has been great information sharing. So I'm looking forward to sharing this with our community as well.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So are we good to start? Can we
Yeah.
start off?
Am
Yeah.
I hope I'm audible.
You're audible, Sushant. Yes, I can hear you. Yes. So I think the first thing that I wanted to know is, as youngsters, all of us, especially I know that all of us are of the similar age group, we tend to stay away from law. So even before we get into the law questions, I'm keen on understanding why did you guys choose law? Because all of us are chasing IT, BT, or medical field, and how did law happen to you? I want to know from both of you. So Sushant, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, while law, I actually wanted to take up civil services, and then I was doing my commerce in my +2, and then somebody advised that it makes sense to do law and then do a civil service rather than any other degree because it gives you a sort of foundation. And in
Yeah.
case civil services does not take off, you can always fall back on law, especially considering I
Right.
also have a family background in law. So
Great.
that's the way I took up law, and then after a point, I guess civil services went out of the window, and I was sure
You
that
enjoyed doing this.
yeah, doing litigation because of the independence I get and variety of work. There's not a
Yeah.
single day which is monotonous. Yeah.
Wow, that's very nice to know. In fact, we had another guest who had recently joined us, Sushant, who was
Yeah.
also attempting civil services, but he did not come from a background of yours. He was doing it from a science background. And I'm sure, knowledge in the field of law is going to help quite a lot for anybody who attempts it. Thank you for sharing that, Sushant. Abhilesh, over to you. How did law happen to you?
So for me, it's like you cannot expect a very conventional answer. For me, it's like it's since childhood, like somehow I've been rather like motivated to pursue law, and I myself like had actually given it a thought. Why exactly did I choose law? I think it's my parents have in fact played a vital role in my
Nice.
decision to take up law, because my father, he also completed law, but he never came into practice. So I'd
All right.
be the first generation lawyer. And
Okay.
since like childhood, I happen to be amongst the youngest in the family. So in
All right.
any gatherings, generally I used to give spontaneous and witty replies. So
Uh,
since childhood, they're like, "Hey, you are suitable for like to becoming a lawyer." I think
okay.
starting from there, I think I was always been inspired. by the amount of knowledge a lawyer would also carry and the
Wow.
respect that a person would command in the society. So
Yeah.
throughout, like it's been like a full-fledged experience for me to become a
Yeah.
lawyer, and
Yeah.
I think I'm here finally.
Thank you so much, Abhilesh. In fact, I'm taking away two important things that what Sushant and you mentioned is if there is anybody who's listening to us and who wants to pursue law, you know that law doesn't, it's not the end. There is furthermore, you can go attempt civil services like what Sushant mentioned. And for all those of you who don't like IT, you don't like medical, and you're trying to figure out what to do, if you're good in communication skills, then follow the footsteps of Abhilesh and hopefully you will also be a great lawyer in the future. So thank you for that. And because I collect life lessons on Project Nyan, I wanted to know from both of you personally, saying, I think each of our professions teaches us a lot, and it makes a lot of difference in an individual's life learning. I want to know from both of you, saying, what did you learn about life when you took up this profession? So, what has your profession taught you? What has it taught you in terms of a life experience altogether? Sushant, you want to take it?
Yeah. See, one thing, as you keep practicing the law, you realize that there's it's pretty much common with the various hurdles that life throws at you. One
Yeah.
thing I have learned personally is patience. A lot of
Mm.
patience is required while dealing with the people, with clients, with courts, and waiting in courts for your matters, and various other aspects of the profession. So
Yeah.
patience, hard work pays definitely,
Yeah.
and it's very the rewarding when you're, because law is also now a passion. So when you're able to monetize your passion and you
Mm.
see the reward, and not talking
Mm.
of monetary terms, reward
Correct.
is in the client's satisfaction or the client's happiness that he's got something back,
Yeah.
he's fighting for a property, some right, and
Yeah.
he's got it, or it's been defended. That I
Mm.
think is the most rewarding aspect of our profession. And
Yeah.
it sort of gives you a helping nature, and
Yeah.
the courage to that you can meet anything that life throws at you by
Yeah.
just by virtue of having practiced in courts for last 8 years.
Yeah.
You are
Beautiful.
confident that you can take on life come what may. So yeah,
Yeah.
these are the
Yeah.
various lessons which I'll
Yeah. No, I think there's
learn.
quite a lot that you have picked up
Yeah.
through your profession, right? And most importantly, you become a part of another person's family altogether, because I think the emotions, everything gets tied along when the case is taken up and you
Y-
become their lawyer,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes, but see, that's where it's important that we don't, become personally attached or emotional with the
Yeah.
case, because we are the independent professional guiding them
Correct.
towards the
Yeah,
goal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sushant.
Thanks.
And Abhilesh, what is life? What is your life learning from your profession?
One thing I have to completely agree with Srishant is patience. That's
Yeah,
one of the most important thing, especially practicing in courts. What
yeah,
court practice teaches you is patience. First thing,
yeah,
so that I'm in complete agreement with Srishant. Next
yeah,
thing is like there are three versions to any story for that matter. So
yeah.
one is going to be your client's story, one is going to be the opposition's story, and
Correct.
the third version being the truth itself. So there's
Yeah,
always three versions. So don't act in in very
yeah,
hurried fashion.
yeah,
Analyze the situation, take it at its
yeah.
own pace. I think again, everything would again boil down to patience, And there's
Correct.
always
Yeah.
a three version to the truth.
Yeah, and also I think, like you said, even if you by mistake, like both of you were mentioning, if you get emotional, then it could be a possibility that you weigh towards something which might not be true. So you have to always be resilient and keep yourself away from whoever's come to you and whoever's discussing the case. Wonderful. So I see a lot of people who have joined in, and hello to everybody. So if you want to share your comments, please go ahead and put down your comments. And if you, in case, have any questions, please put those questions there. I'm going to be taking all these questions in some time. So to start off with, the questions which were shared over the stories when I put up, I'm going to be asking our two beautiful gentlemen who are here and figure out the answers for that. So the first question that we had, Sushant, over to you, is somebody had asked us saying, when is the right time to get a will done and who should do it? Because I think we thought wills is all about old age. So just if you can share some light on that.
Yeah. See, when is the right time to make a will? It's not a question that I think can be answered. Ec-
Hmm.
because death is a certainty, but the timing of death is uncertain. So
Correct.
because a will is made to provide for how your properties and assets and liabilities should be dealt with post your death, when you are no
Yeah.
longer in the world. So that's why will is an important document which I believe strongly should be prepared by anyone. And
Hmm.
see, the basic requirements for a person to make a will is he should be a major above 18 years, of
Okay.
sound mind,
Hmm.
and if he has properties in his name, then any time would be a right time to make a will. But then uh, in the normal course, analyzing a person's health, a person's
Yeah.
age, or if he's
Hmm.
mental disease like dementia and such other illnesses,
Hmm.
then it's prudent and if he has several properties, or in the event somebody feels that there could be a dispute between his successors, that is his children and wife, or some such issues in the future, it's prudent that a will is prepared, clearly
Okay.
laying down how and to whom the properties shall be divided, and what responsibilities are cast on each person,
Hmm.
and meeting for certain other expenses from out of your assets.
Okay.
So yeah, when just like I said,
Like you said, after 18 years.
right, maybe the right time is now. So no time
Correct.
like the present, is a old saying. So,
Yeah, yeah. In
and
fact,
the second part,
I also know of a story, Sushant, of
yeah.
somebody who did not leave a will back, and it affected the widow a lot. And it was an accident that really happened.
Oh,
And he was a youngster who lost his life. But
uh,
I think for her, just to get a two-wheeler transferred, it took 2 years. So I think people don't realize the importance of writing a will. But you
yes.
rightly mentioned it. Please go ahead, Sushant. Sorry to cut you through.
Sorry, Kripa. The second part of it, first was you asked me when is the right time. The
Yeah,
second,
yeah. And then I also wanted to know who should do it. Can everybody
uh,
do it? Like, I don't have properties in my name. So, can I also do a will? Or is it only for people who have properties?
see, it may not be necessary because a will is basically we call it a bequest in a legal terminology. Is basically making a bequest or bequeathing your property to someone to whom you should pass on to after your lifetime.
Okay.
So it may not be required at all, though
Hmm.
people in wills mention each and every property that they have that needs to be transferred. For example, something as simple as a gas connection or a telephone connection, uh,
Yeah.
uh, they make a bequest regarding this as well. My gas connection should go to my son, my telephone, my
Hmm.
car.
Yeah.
These things are there. So yeah, if you have properties, then yes. Otherwise,
Great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that, Sushant. So, for
yeah.
any listener who's out here, like a common man like me, if you're above the age of 18, you have a property, you don't have a property, go ahead and do it. If you have a property, much more reason to do it. If you do not have it, like he mentioned, even those, I think the other assets, you can always write saying anything that comes into my name goes into this person, like what Sushant was mentioning, which means all the connections, everything which is there, it automatically gets transferred. And the people whom you leave behind don't get affected. Thank you so much for that, Sushant.
I'll
Yeah,
just a small addition. Even intellectual properties, that is intangible rights like a
yeah,
copyright, if anything is owned by you, even
okay,
those which are yours,
can be transferred.
it can be transferred, but though there are certain restrictions on that as per the law.
Sure,
So,
sure. Okay, I
Just
think we will
to add
touch
on,
base on that.
Kripalini.
Yeah,
Abhilesh wants
yeah,
to.
Yes, so it's basically, like you could execute a will, like for mobile properties as well as immobile properties. Okay,
hmm.
there's no bar on that. So one other aspect that you have to, like consider is, like, again, as Sushant also mentioned, a person
Hmm.
should be a major. So this is basically, like if you were to see how exactly, like executing of a will
Hmm.
is like coming into picture. So it basically comes into force only after the demise of the person. That is the testator we call. The testator would be
Okay,
the person who is executing the will and like who is actually drawing up the will. Okay,
okay,
so
okay,
he will be called a testator, and
okay.
it comes into effect only after the demise of the person. Okay, it would not
Ah,
have
okay.
any immediate effect. So, for
Great.
example, let's
Okay.
assume that I write a will, and
Yeah.
when exactly it would take effect is after my demise. Okay, so that is one
Okay.
very
Okay.
important consideration, which would set
Okay.
like a will a little apart from any other documentation.
Got
So it
it.
is basically the intention of the testator as to how his property will have to be dealt post his demise.
All right.
Okay, so if
Okay.
in case,
Okay.
let's assume that like I am possessed of like several immovable properties and I do not execute a will, what would be the repercussions under such circumstances? Is
Yeah.
it would be called as interstate succession. Okay, so
Okay.
it would not be affected by a will because let's say I have not executed any will.
Hmm.
Therefore, inheritance, I mean, like succession would open immediately
Okay.
after the demise of the person. Okay,
Okay.
if there is no, I mean, like if I write a will,
Hmm.
the property is affected by my will.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
transfer would take place based on the will, that I would say. And here, will, one other important aspect that everyone should also bear in mind is
Hmm.
also to the effect that will is also affected by your personal laws. For example, amongst Hindus, will cannot be executed for ancestral property. Okay,
Okay.
so any
Okay.
self-acquired property, they can definitely execute a will. Let's say
Hmm.
I have earned out of my own self earnings, I have procured a property. I
Hmm.
can execute a will to
Will.
that particular property. Any
Okay.
ancestral property which I would have gotten through
Hmm.
succession, I cannot execute a will for that particular property.
All
Likewise,
right.
amongst Mohammedans, there's no
Huh.
classification of self-acquired property or ancestral property. So
Okay.
any person who will be eligible to execute a will,
Hmm.
at the maximum, he could execute a will for 30% of his property. If let's say
Okay.
the entire valuation of his assets would work
Hmm.
up to 10 lakhs, the
Okay.
maximum uh, potential that he can actually execute a will would be
Hmm.
restricted to a maximum of 30%.
Okay. Okay. So that clause is also there. All right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I got it, Abhilesh. So that means a will comes into action only after death.
After that.
And I think based on religions that we follow, there are different clauses that has to be kept in mind related to inherited property. And when I'm making a will, that means it's only 30% that I can make a will for, and the rest is not to be considered, right?
30% only in case of
That's only
Mohammedans.
for
Correct. Only for them.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Got it.
One
Yeah.
other thing that I also would want to add to Palani
Sure.
would
Sure,
be that
Abhilesh.
like mandatorily there has to be two attesting witnesses, which is of
Okay.
like utmost importance if in case it were to go into a court of law.
Hmm.
Okay, for grant of probate. So two attesting witnesses is mandatory, and
Okay.
registration is optional. Okay,
Okay.
so one could
Okay.
choose to register a will, or one may not choose to register a will as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Abhilesh. I hope whoever's listening to us today and they've understood what it really means to get a will done and how to go about with it. Abhilesh, my follow-up question then would be, what's the difference between a will and a gift deed? Because I know of people talking saying it's a gift deed and it's not a will. So how do we differentiate both of that?
Okay, gift deed is an entirely different documentation. Okay, so gift
Okay.
could be given to any person. It's basically a voluntary act
Hmm.
without any consideration. Okay,
Okay.
voluntarily out of love and affection, a person could execute a gift deed in favor of
Hmm.
any person. Gift deed could be executed for movable as well as immovable properties. Okay, so
Okay.
with respect to movable properties, you need not have to get it mandatorily registered. However,
Hmm.
in case of immovable properties, it is mandatory that you register the gift deed. Okay,
Okay.
and with respect to movable properties, by mere handing over possession of the property, it would
Hmm.
constitute as a valid gift. Whereas with respect to
Okay.
immovable property, registration is mandatory. And there are
Hmm.
two aspects to a gift as well, Krupalini. So
Okay.
any gift, for it to constitute as a valid gift, there has to
Hmm.
be, well, there shouldn't be any consideration, first aspect, and the
Hmm.
gift should be accepted as well. So
Hmm.
acceptance is a very crucial term, in fact, in terms of like legally speaking. Okay,
Okay.
so when a person, there has to be a donor and there
Hmm.
has to be a donee. The donor
Dhoni. Yeah.
has to give the property, and the
All
donee has
right.
to accept it. So acceptance is
Hmm.
really crucial. So
Okay.
acceptance need not have to be immediate.
Okay.
Acceptance could be throughout during the lifetime of the donor, and where
Okay.
the donor is still in the capacity to give a gift. So during
Okay.
this entire
Okay.
period, the donee would still be have the privilege of accepting the gift,
Hmm.
and that would constitute as a valid gift.
Okay.
Okay, so what happens is the major crucial aspect that would
Hmm.
differentiate a will as well as gift is immediate action. So what happens is when a gift deed is executed,
Hmm.
since there has to be a acceptance, it takes immediate effect. Okay. For
Okay.
example, I execute a gift deed in favor of Sushant. He
Hmm.
becomes the owner at the very instance itself. The moment it is
He
registered,
accepts. Yeah.
he becomes the owner of the property. Whereas
Okay.
with respect to a will would
Okay.
only come into effect post the demise of the testator.
Got it.
Sushant, if you
Got
would
it.
want to add anything, Sushant?
Yeah, Abhilash, I'm looking forward to that gift deed firstly from you. I think there's one similarity. Yes, I think Abhilash has covered pretty much, but then
Yeah.
I have a couple of points. One thing is one similarity between gift deeds and wills is gift deed also requires two witnesses to be present at the time of registration.
Hmm.
Similar to a will.
To the will.
Will of course, like Abhilash also pointed out, does not require registration. And one more thing I would like to add there is registering a will by itself does not mean that the will is proved in case there is a dispute and you go to court.
Hmm.
So, but two attesting witnesses is mandatory for a gift as well as a will. And gift, one more aspect that comes into the picture apart from registration is the stamp duty payable if it's an immovable property.
Okay.
Now, in a will, now in the case of a will which comes into effect one after your death, there is no stamp duty as such payable, whether you're registering or not registering, irrespective. You can bequeath as many immovable or movable properties you want in that one document. The only requirements being you are a major and of sound mind, and and there is no coercion. Even for a will, there should be no coercion.
Okay.
Now, even if a person is gifting it to his own children, and there is coercion, and that can be proved, that on that ground itself, the will can be held invalid. Similar for a gift deed also.
Gift deed also. Okay.
But in a gift deed, depending on the market value of the property, the stamp duty is calculated, and stamp duty has to be paid as per the relevant stamp law, which varies from state to state in India.
Okay. Got it.
It's not common. So that I think is a few differences and one similarity. Two similarities is witnesses and of course the voluntariness of the execution of the gift and will. And we should usually out of love and affection rather than any other material consideration.
Right. So in case from what I understand is, in case I want to give it to somebody immediately as a gift, I can do it even before the death. And if I write a will, that means it's only going to come into action later. Now, let's say, we have properties where, it is it's already there's a loan that's been taken on the property. And if that's happens to the loan if it is a gift deed, what happens to the loan if it's a will, just to understand from a perspective.
Sorry, I think I lost you while
Can
in
you
the
hear
course
me
of your
now?
question.
Can you hear me now,
Yeah.
Sushant? So, no, what I was saying is, let's say, there's a loan taken on the property, and now the person is executing a will or he's executing a gift deed. What happens to the loan, and, what are the formalities around that?
So, of course, it will be one subject to the rights of the charge holder or the property. That's usually it should be a bank or a financial institution. However, once you've accepted the gift, you also take not only the property but also all the obligations that come with it.
Got it.
Even in case of a will, I cannot say once the will comes into effect, I cannot say, okay, I'm taking the property, but I'm not going to clear the loan in respect of which property is offered as collateral. Similarly for a gift. So the concept in law is you have to take the property along with whatever obligations comes with it, or you choose not to take it at all. You can't
Got it.
So this is basically to prevent default and things like that.
I think that's some great knowledge. Yeah, go ahead, Abhila.
It is in fact called onerous gift. So where it comes with a liability as well. So
got it.
A person cannot, let's assume that one particular document would give both asset as well as a liability in one single documentation. The donee cannot choose between accepting only the asset and refusing to accept the onerous gift.
Got it.
So he has to either accept it in its entirety, or he have to
reject and not take it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, as it is.
Got it.
And one other aspect, just to add on to the registration of the giftee, if it is immediate blood relative, there is no calculation of stamp duty. The stamp duty is ascertained at as of now within Karnataka, it is assessed at 6,000 rupees. If it is
Okay.
outside the first blood relative, in that event, the existing market value of the property is taken into consideration for registration of the gift deed, for calculation of the stamp duty.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much, Abhilesh. I think, both of you have given us good information on how to differentiate between a will and a gift deed and when should we do it and how do we go about with it. If there's any further questions on this, please go ahead and put it out there. I'm going to be taking those questions and asking both these gentlemen out there. So the next question that I have is for you, Abhilesh, is if you can tell me, if you can tell me, saying, if in case one has to visit a police station, right, it could be probably because somebody has put a false case against the person, or it could be because I'm putting a case against another person. So if I'm going into a police station, what are the access rights and what are those protocols that one has to follow? Because I think this is something that we don't predict and we don't want to do, but I think life just towards that direction. So what should we be aware of related to police station?
Before I actually touched on upon that particular fact, the moment we say police station, people are kind of like skeptical towards approaching the police station. They have their own reservations and things. So I would definitely take this opportunity to tell everybody, there's no fear to like approach a police station. They're actually just as human beings as everyone else are. Okay. So one other aspect as well as a misconception like most of the general public would have is I've seen a lot of people approaching police stations on civil disputes. So, you have to be aware that police station or the authorities there cannot interfere in a civil dispute. Any civil dispute has to be adjudicated before a civil court, and the police station people cannot interfere in it, and they have no say whatsoever in any civil matters for that.
Abhilesh, if you can tell the audience, what do you mean by a civil case, Abhilesh, if somebody does not understand it?
See, civil dispute could be anything ranging from like how exactly. So let's say like any property disputes. Let's say like he's trespassing. So though like trespassing is to an extent a criminal action as well. So for example, let's say like there's a property. Okay, and let's assume that our Sushant here is trespassing into my property. In that event, I would want an injunctive relief as against him, not to trespass or not to cause any nuisance to me as such.
Got it.
Okay. So in that event, I cannot go to a police station telling that, okay, Sushant is disturbing me and things. All that I have to do is I have to go to a civil court asking for injunctive relief as against Sushant. Okay.
Got it.
So let's assume that Sushant were to use the same trespass, but he's using force. Okay, he's bringing in a few of his friends and not doing anything. In that event, I can definitely go to the police station, and police can definitely intervene. But again, their powers are also restricted when it comes to like any civil disputes are concerned. All that they can do is they can accord me protection as against anything being done over the property. But ultimately, to safeguard my property, I have to go to a civil court because of the nature of the dispute there that is involved.
Okay, so if there's any family issues, we can't go to the police station. It's a civil court.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
So what would be the protocols that one will have to take before going to a police station? So I would say generally, if in case there is any, so one aspect that you have to remember before we actually enter into this topic is in India, the criminal jurisprudence is such that any person can set the criminal law into motion. Okay, it need not necessarily have to be a victim that who steps into the police station and he or she lodges a complaint. Okay, so it need not necessarily have to be an aggrieved person or the victim. So let's assume that I'm actually walking on the road and I see chain snatching happening. I can set the criminal law into motion. I can definitely go into the police station and give as much as details that are within my information. Okay. So what happens is, as I give the information, the police would take what is called as a first information report. Okay. So once they register the first information report, post which they will start investigating into the issue, and after that they'll also file a charge sheet, and then it will take a criminal. It will be put up before the court. And it takes a criminal route.
Got it.
It will go in for a trial. So protocols as such, that would be required. Is as we are giving the first information, it is always advisable that we carry the maximum amount of information to the police at the outside. Because a police person, please bear this in mind, he is going to be a neutral party who is sitting there in the police station having no idea as to what has happened, what is the real incident that or the crime that has actually taken place. So once you go to the police station, give a very detailed report as to what exactly happened, what was the time, and maximum details possible. Okay, let's assume there is some theft that has actually happened. In that event, you will have to rather substantiate all the information by also giving description of the property that has also been lost. Okay, so let's say like a vehicle has been lost, you have to give the insurance copy of the vehicle, you have to give the RC book of the vehicle, so and ownership to establish ownership. So these are like very crucial documents that would be required for the police to commence investigation. So once you give all these information, the police definitely would be willing to register the FIR. And once they register the FIR, the person who is giving the information also be entitled for a free copy of the FIR itself. So that is one very important aspect. Let's say anybody who walks into the police station and gives a FIR and the FIR is registered, you are entitled for a free copy of the first information report.
Got it.
So let's say I am the accused in that particular matter. In that event, depending upon the nature of the offense, the police would also issue a notice to me. Let's say I am the accused. So the police would issue a notice to me asking me to appear before the police station. And here I have to appear before the police station and substantiate what is my defense. Okay. So as at the time of interrogation, our CRPC would still, criminal procedure code would give you provision wherein you could also be accompanied by an advocate. But also bear in mind that having an advocate throughout the entire interrogation is not permissible. It is only optional, and advocates could very well participate in the interrogatory up to an extent.
Okay. Got it.
So thereafter, whenever an accused is taken into custody, so he has to be produced before a magistrate, jurisdictional magistrate, within the next 24 hours from the date of arrest, from the time of arrest. So as at the time of arrest as well, arrest memo should be drawn up, and it should be given to the nearest available relative, blood relative preferably, or a respectable person in the society. That is what the code would actually say. Arrest memo would be given. Thereafter, generally, once the arrest memo is received by a relative, they'll apply for bail, as well as there is another concept of applying for anticipatory bail. Okay. Before I actually touched on upon anticipatory bail as well as bail, generally what happens is after the arrest is made, within 24 hours, in a usual course, I'd be produced before a magistrate, and the magistrate would have liberty to either release me on bail, release an accused on bail, rather. I'll not put myself into the shoes. So release an accused on bail, or they could also send him for judicial custody. Okay. So judicial custody would again be like of two classifications. One is police custody as well as judicial custody. Police custody, as in like where the accused would be sent back to the police custody, wherein he'll be interrogated further towards like finding the actual facts of the crime. Whereas with respect to judicial custody, they generally send the accused to the centralized prison.
Okay.
So thereafter, what happens is the police would conduct investigation and they would file a charge sheet, post which it would sit in for a criminal trial. So
it's not like how it happens in the movies, right? There's so much that actually goes behind it. Got it, Abhilash?
No, definitely not. Unfortunately, I don't see any realistic movie which has been made which would exactly depict the court procedure.
Correct. Go ahead, Abhilash. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. So next aspect is bail as well as anticipatory bail. So a bail is applied when a person is actually taken into custody, whereas an anticipatory bail is taken when a person is apprehending arrest. So if there is a FIR registered and a person apprehends arrest, he could as well approach the court and he could seek for anticipatory bail. So anticipatory bail would exactly mean that the police would still arrest the person, but
Yeah.
immediately upon his arrest, he would be released on bail. Before, I'm
Okay.
like, in a usual course, they, as I earlier mentioned, they'd be taken before a judicial magistrate, and again the remand would happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. In an anticipatory bail, that is not the case. Immediately upon arrest, the police would reflect that the accused has been arrested and released on bail based on the anticipatory bail order that has been passed.
Got
So
it.
any person anticipating, generally anticipatory bail is kind of like widely used these days. Any person
Yeah.
who apprehends, including rape victims.
Hmm.
One recent trend that you could also see is like consensual sex has later on being alleged to have been rape. Under such
Hmm.
circumstances, people have approached the courts asking for anticipatory bail, and the courts have also appreciated it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this is
Got it.
take on anticipatory bail as well as bail.
Yeah, got it, Abhilesh. So, my takeaways from what you mentioned is, in case I want to give a case, I have to differentiate between if it's a civil case or if it's something to do with what is the other terminology that you used?
Criminal.
Criminal cases,
Criminal.
Criminal, right? Yeah, so
basically
it's
law
either
and order is
civil
what
or,
we generally
yeah,
say.
so yeah, anything related to law and order is when I approach the police station, and I have to give a FIR in detail, whoever is lodging the complaint. And if the complaint is against a person, there is going to be an arrest warrant that is going to be taken, and to take care of the arrest warrant is the bail and the anticipatory bail. And I think you clearly mentioned all the differences. So for people out there, it is not like how it is done in the movies, like what they really mention. I think there's a lot of legalities which goes behind it. And I think from what I hear from what they're saying is, there's not going to be any kind of decisions made unless and until that it's been proven exactly, saying this person is the accuser, is the person, I mean, whoever's been accused is really the person who's done the mistake. Is that right, Abhilesh?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
So Shant, you had
Yeah.
something to share. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, not much, but then as a lawyer, we always have to say something. So,
Yeah.
a couple of things is there is a difference between what the terminologies that we use in common parlance.
Yeah.
I think the simplest term would be the concept of cheating. What we feel like, we say we will go file a case under 420 for
Hmm.
cheating, and what is defined as the offense under section 420 in the Indian penal code, there is a difference. So
Got
it's
it.
always important that whether whatever the offense that we feel has been committed satisfies or meets the requirements of the definition of that offense as defined, be it in the Indian penal code or any other law governing the offense complained of. So that is
Yeah.
essential, because what we may think we know as a common man may not be what exactly is stated in the law. So that is one thing we need to understand before we approach a police station saying that a crime has been committed and I want to register a complaint. A simple,
Got it.
quick example to just add on to what Abhilesh has
Hmm.
already, I mean, he's given us a quite
Yeah.
comprehensive coverage, is now example in contracts, commercial contracts.
Hmm.
Just because there is a breach of contract or somebody has not paid you money under a contract, by itself will not you know give you a right to immediately approach the police and say he's not paying me the money or there's a breach of
Hmm.
contract, because that again would fall under what Abhilesh was saying is a civil dispute, because it
Correct.
arises out of a breach of contract which is to be decided by the courts, unless
Got
there's a
it.
criminal angle to it which you can which you'll have to examine the facts of the case. I'm not going to delve into that.
Got it. Yeah.
And another thing, yes, like Abhilesh rightly said, people should not be afraid to go to the police either as the complainant or as the accused. They are also as much human as we are. Only
Yeah.
thing we must understand is they are overworked, overstressed, under
Yeah.
pressures of work, and protecting the law and order now, including the COVID situation, has further burdened them. So we need to
Correct.
appreciate that fact while we are dealing with them. And once we start looking at them like that and treating them
Yeah.
with respect for the things they do, then maybe perception will change. And because when
Yeah.
we treat them with respect, why will they not reciprocate that respect to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is
And I think
something.
it's the same with the teaching profession also. People tend to
Yeah.
think teachers are very strict. It's just that I think through all the experiences that they've gone through, that's how teachers become whatever
Yeah,
that they are.
and see, police have to come across as stern. I mean, otherwise, how are you going to be afraid of what we call the long arm of the law? They are the ones
Correct.
who execute the or enforce the laws, and
Hmm.
what stand between us and total chaos or lawlessness. They are the
Yeah,
literally the guardians. So I think we should appreciate that fact while thinking of approaching them. Of course
yeah.
there will be some examples to the contrary, but that's I think the case in any field.
Got
So
it, Sushant. Thank
yeah,
you so much for that information. If you can take another question for us, Sushant,
yeah,
is this is something that I've heard a lot of freshers, and I know a lot of people who are youngsters who've joined our call today, and I just want you people to shed some light on we as employees we tend to sign a lot of NDAs,
uh,
right? So what is this NDA and how does it affect an employee? If you can talk about it, because I think in the happiness and the excitement of wanting to join the job and taking up the offer, they tend to sign all the documents which has been given. So, but otherwise, legally, what does an NDA mean? And if you can shed light on that.
yeah. So NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. It can be a separate agreement by itself, or it can be a couple of clauses in a general employment contract or
Hmm.
employment agreement. Now
Hmm.
see, it is very essential for employers to insert this clause. It's done not only between employers and employees, but also between service providers, vendors,
Yeah.
independent contractors, or government and non-government entity, between, I am sure, between even governments of different countries when they
Yeah.
enter into certain contractual relations. So it is basically to protect our confidential and proprietary information or intellectual property rights. Now if
Got it.
what do I mean by this? Now various companies develop their own information, their own content, their own curriculum. For example, if you're in the online teaching sphere,
Yeah.
you develop all these or they certain manufacturing companies, they have certain manufacturing processes which
Yeah.
go into the making of a certain tool or a certain product,
Product.
which is
Yeah.
the hard work of their own innovation. And as an
Got it.
employee, I am of course working in that process and manufacturing it, or spreading the content to the students, etc. But
Hmm.
I am doing that, or I am able to get an opportunity to do that as an employee of the company.
Hmm.
Otherwise I would not have got the access to that knowledge, or to that
Yes.
information. So
Hmm.
that the company has to protect, and these obligations are to be adhered to not only during the term of the contract, but
Hmm.
usually they continue even after the termination of the contract or
At
expiration of
least
the
for
contract.
6 months or so.
No, usually confidentiality obligations do not have a timeline, usually,
Okay. Hmm.
because we have to protect our
Got it.
proprietary information.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what will happen is it can be exploited, or even
Got it.
during the course, or even after the termination of. I'm talking of any contract,
Yeah.
including employer-employee. The same concept applies,
Hmm.
because this is information which is the hard work of a certain person or a certain company, which
Hmm.
has to be protected, and the law recognizes that. Because
Got it.
otherwise we are just it's as simple as piracy. I mean, if not
Yes.
for something like this, somebody may be siphoning off your information and making gain from it, without
Yeah.
having put without having any input in it at all.
Got
So
it,
to
Sushant.
prevent that,
Yeah.
non-disclosure clauses or non-disclosure separate non-disclosure agreements are entered into. And even in if you take into a stock scenarios, it's done so that to ensure maybe the, or rather prevent events of insider trading and
Hmm.
things like that is also prevented, because I am maybe privy to certain
Yeah.
information which may help me trade in stocks
Yeah.
as an employee or whatever, a vendor of a certain company. So
Okay.
I am also barred from
I got it.
indulging in the. So that's
Sure.
the concept of NDAs.
Yeah.
And this may not be, just to add a little more to this, because this may not be known generally, is what I feel. This
Hmm.
is not only a contractual obligation. This in fact draws its essence from something known as the law of torts, which was
Okay.
developed in England in centuries ago.
Okay.
The torch basically is your uh, rights, and which are basically governed not by any contract or not by any legislation or statute, but it's developed through common law, or rather the judge made law by the judges in England, and which
Yeah.
we are also following today. So
Okay.
tort also says that as an employee, you owe the duty of fidelity to your employer, and
Yes.
the trust and confidence, because these form the bedrock of an employer-employee relation. And
Yeah.
unless we have that trust and confidence in the employee, how
Hmm.
am I going to share it with him so that he can utilize it? Because he's being
Yes.
paid for it. The employee is
Correct.
being paid his
Correct.
wages or his salary for it. And various things can be protected. I'm not only your, it's not something very
Yeah.
highly intellectual like your course content or
Correct.
things like that. Even something as mundane as your pricing formulae or your statistical data. How do you analyze uh, a client's information?
Anything related to
Anything
that
which is
organization.
proprietary
Hmm.
to that organization, which the
Got it.
organization uses as marketing strategies, business plans, client lists. All these
Got it.
have been protected in various judgments in the courts of England, and
Yeah.
also in our courts over the last few decades. And it's getting more and more recognized in India, which is
Yeah.
good, because that shows that we are progressing in our jurisprudence as well as in our economy.
Got it.
So,
Yeah. Thank you, Sushant. I think there's a follow-up question. Thank you so much, guys, for joining in and for putting in all your questions out here. So I'm going to, this is from a person called Lalit Braganza. I'm going to probably reduce the question size and ask you this. So is it possible that, after I've quit the organization, that the employer can ask me to sign an NDA? Is that something which is acceptable or no? Because I'm no more in an employee-employer relationship.
yes, that is acceptable. Like I said, well, it's more important that it is protected after, because during the employment you may still have the fear that you will be terminated or there'll be disciplinary proceedings, etc. But these are executed even post employment termination. Like I said, it is they were derived from the law of torts, age-old concepts from the law of torts.
Got it.
And it is basically crystallization of the rights which you are signing in the contract when you're leaving the organization.
Got it. And if they've left the organization, then they have nothing to do with it, right, Sushant? If
uh,
if the person has left the organization 6 months ago, the
uh,
organization can't come back and ask them to sign after 6 months.
no, after you left, I mean, there is no contractual
Yeah, they
obligation
Correct.
cannot
for you to go back. But then
compel
again,
a person.
the tort would. I'm sorry, Abhilash. I'll just complete.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. The tort. Then, like I said, the tort would then come into picture. That is, irrespective of the existence of a contract, outside the field of a contract also,
Mhm.
the duty of an employee is to of confidence, fidelity, trust, etc., is recognized by the law, and that can be enforced by the employer, and it's protected by law. I think
Got it.
Abhilesh wanted to say
Sure.
something.
Go ahead, Abhilesh. Yeah.
Same here, Sushant. They cannot compel a employee to, once he has quit the organization, they cannot compel him to, come and sign a NDA. There
Got
cannot
it.
be any compulsion, because it would, in fact, defeat the very purpose of a valid contract. It would Indian
Right.
Contract Act
Right.
would say that it has to be entered voluntarily and without any force
Got
or
it.
coercion. So
Got
if
it.
in
Got it.
case ex-employee were to be
Yeah.
compelled to sign an agreement, it would definitely be void. It cannot be a valid
Got it,
NDA.
Abhilesh.
In fact, under such circumstances, the only recourse that would be open for the previous employer would be to approach a court telling that he cannot divulge any
Information. Yeah.
sensitive information to the next employee, the present employee that it
Yes.
might be.
Got it. So I hope that answers your question, Lalit Braganza. And thank you so much for the rest of the questions that you guys are putting out there. I'm going to be taking up each of these questions and asking them. Just give me some time, because there was a lot of questions which was shared earlier when I'd asked for questions related to the topic. So let me finish that off and take up these questions. The next thing in follow-up to what Sushant was mentioning, Abhilesh, he mentioned about intellectual property rights. So I want to know from your perspective, saying, are they really protected in India? Because I know a lot of people talking about IPR related to US or anything else. So how is IPR taken care of in India?
Yes, in fact, it is really well protected in India, and India also happens to be a signatory at the international level to several modules where it is actually well safeguarded. So, Indian intellectual property rights is basically classified into three topics, headings in India. So, patents, copyrights, as well as trademark. This, in fact, at the present day scenario, it is like one of the major backbones for any commercial establishment to have their intellectual property protected, because that would be the reputation, for example, that matter, any company that would carry the
Yeah.
of late, we have like a lot of affinity to certain brands. The moment you look into a particular logo, you are immediately able to identify the company. It's because of the reputation as well as the like intellectual property rights that the like company would have developed over a period of time. Yes, patents is one aspect. A trademark is another aspect, as well as copyrights. Copyrights could range somewhere from any artistic work. It could be like a drawing, it could be anything, original creation for that matter. So it can be copyrighted. So that is one aspect. Whereas like with respect to patent is when you actually invent something. It's not an innovation. You have to rather invent it. So patent is it's like really, really crucial, especially when it comes to like major industrial developments and where companies do patent their technology. Okay. So one other aspect is trademark. Trademark is the one which we come across in our daily life, but hardly many people would know.
Notice it, yeah.
You would have seen a lot of company logos which would have TM next to their names. So that would only mean to say that the said person has applied for a trademark and it would still not be registered. The moment it is registered, the said company would start using the alphabet R with a circle around it. So that is when the logo, the way in which, the manner in which it is actually written, including the color combination, the font that has been used, it is actually called as like it's a registered owner.
Got it. Yeah.
In fact, as Sushant earlier also pointed out, it is transferable. It can be transferable. So generally, the founders, would transfer it in favor of the company after the company has been incorporated, and it becomes the the company would become the owner of the said trademark as well. Okay, it is very well safeguarded. I think Sushant would like to add something.
Do you have anything to add on that, Sushant?
Yeah, if I can have a few points actually.
Sure.
Abhilash, are you done?
Yes, please.
Okay. So in addition to the three intellectual property rights that Abhilash spoke about, there are two others as well. One is the designs and the other is geographical indicators, GI, which is more commonly known as GI. So design is basically protecting the, put it in simple terms, the design of a product. Now, for example, take this glass I'm holding in my hand. If you can notice, there are some
ridges.
Ridges, So these ridges, now if they are something which I have designed or developed out of uniquely, and it's something new or unique to me, these can be registered as a design under the Designs Act. And similarly, geographical indicators would be indigenous goods. Like for example, take our simple everyday item, haldi. If I remember, there was somebody in the US who tried to claim some patent or something on the use of haldi or ghee. I remember reading something.
Turmeric, yes, that's correct.
Turmeric, on US, right? That was.
Yes, US, it is US.
So that's why GI is important, because that is crucial to protect our indigenous culture. Not only for India, I'm talking of anybody, anywhere in the world. In fact, recently I was just reading up something that there is some haldi which is specific to Orissa, specific region in Orissa, southern Orissa, that has also got the GI tag. That basically protects and preserves and promotes indigenous cultures or your local handicrafts, artisans, because then that is recognized as being specific to or unique to your region, and therefore nobody else can tomorrow commercialize it or utilize it, saying that they developed it. This is the way to protect our ancient cultures and ancient knowledge. To give a quick example, if I may.
Sure, Sushant.
For the different types, I'm giving a very example of the top of my head, just for people to understand the concept of these 5 intellectual properties that we spoke about. So please don't hold me to the legalities of it. This is just for people to broadly understand.
Yeah, in fact,
concepts. Yeah.
I think we should also put that disclaimer out,
Yeah,
Sushant,
yeah.
saying, everything that these two gentlemen are sharing is basic information and does not ever mean that this is how it is treated exactly in the court of law. And it depends on case to case and,
Right.
depending on the legalities. So please understand that these are basic general information. So you can't go by exactly the same thing. Depending on case to case, you can apply whatever is to be applied on that. Go ahead, Sushant. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm just yeah. Thanks for that disclaimer. It's very important because people should not just like, so for example, it's as simple as your telemedicine. Nothing can substitute for a personal examination by the doctor.
Yeah.
So similar to that, nothing can substitute for us going through the facts of a case, understanding, reading up on the law, and then giving you advice. This is just a general example I'm giving off the top of my head, just for people to understand what are the 5 different kinds of IP. I think Haldi by itself, GI, so
Yeah.
that I think everybody can relate to. Now, for example, let's talk of a perfume bottle. Now, the brand name on the perfume bottle, whatever name it's marketed under or logo, etc. Now that would constitute a trademark, whether it's registered or not. And similarly, let's say you have some tagline for that, which you use to market, which you come up with, which somebody in your company has come up with. That maybe we can say can be copyrighted because that's an original. Or if there is some artistic work on it, like I remember
a logo or anything.
Logo. Like in the olden days, we had this character called Fido Dido for, if I'm not wrong, for 7 Up. So maybe possibly that can be original artistic work or literary work, which we can say can be copyrighted. This is just for people to understand the nuances of these. Yeah. So that could be a copyright. Patent would not be the final product as such, or the final fragrance that you are smelling, but it would be the unique combination of the ingredients that go into making that fragrance, which can be patented.
Got it.
So that is called a process patent. There is also a product patent. I mean, I'll not go into those details. So it is more what is protected in law. I think I've covered the and the design, of course, is the bottle. The way the bottle is designed, like for perfume bottles, you have very fancy cuts and designs, shapes for the bottles to make it more attractive. That can maybe be protected under the Designs Act. So intellectual properties, especially copyrights and trademarks, they may be registered, they may not be registered, like Abhilesh was pointing out. Just because they're not registered does not mean that you don't have a right in law to enforce them. Registration just makes it that much more simpler for you to establish the fact that you are the owner of the copyright or the trademark, GI, etc. So if somebody is looking at developing their IP, it's better that once you develop it, you take necessary steps to protect
register
it. Because what's
protected,
register and protected. And please keep in mind, it is the expression of the idea that's protected. The way in which the idea is expressed, that is protected, rather than the idea itself. Otherwise, you will be defeating inventiveness and innovativeness.
Yes, got it. Thank you so much for that,
Sushant. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead, Sushant.
Intellectual property rights litigation has been coming of age in India. It's increasing, which also shows how we as a country are maturing and developing into recognizing these rights, because these are as intellectual property. You cannot see them. As opposed to, let's say, land. That's why we call land as real estate, because it's real. You can see it. It's tangible. These are incorporeal. You cannot see it, feel it. So people tend to ignore, or not ignore. Maybe they're just not aware of the rights that exist,
and they probably don't even know that this is an intellectual property.
Property. So that's why these are called intellectual property rights, because what you're protecting is what goes into that final product as such. Like I explained, a simple example of perfume bottle.
Sushant. Thank you for that, Sushant. In fact, for all of you listeners who are watching us and who are listening to us, I hope this discussion is giving you some bits of information saying, the legal system is there to support. You just have to be aware, saying what you can put into action and what do you really want to register. And you have a lot of support out there. And all the 5 terminologies, I will not even get into those details. I think he beautifully explained and also explained it with a nice, good example. If you have further more questions, we will take that in due course of time. And I think there's somebody called Srinath Kamath who's appreciating your work, and there's a lot of your friends and family who've joined in, and a lot of people saying that there's a lot of clarity in information that you people are sharing. So thank you. Keep that going, and keep telling us, saying, if you have any questions, I'll take it up. I think there's one particular question, Abhishek Patak. I'm going to combine your question with Abhilesh's next question that I have. So the next question that I had in continuation to what Sushant was saying, Abhilesh, is, he mentioned saying, okay, now people are talking about IPR and there's a lot of cases getting registered. What I also see is during this pandemic, a lot of startups are also coming into life. Right. And I see a lot of them saying, okay, I'm going to establish something new and I'm going to go about with it. Now, I might establish without registering. Now, what kind of organizations do I have to register? How do I have to go about with it? If you can shed some light on that, if somebody is listening to us today and wants to start an organization or a company by themselves, what is it that they have to keep in mind? IPR is one that we already know. What else do they have to keep in mind, Abhilesh?
Kripalini, I assume that you're asking with respect to the constitution of the.
Yes.
Okay. So it could be a sole proprietorship is one part of it. So if a person is like independently wanting to register or conduct business, he could do it as a sole proprietorship by taking a requisite licenses from the municipal authorities. And the next aspect would be to a partnership firm as well. So registration of a partnership is actually mandatory if in case you want to sue or to be sued. Partnership registration would be mandatory. Okay. Otherwise, registration of partnership is only optional. Okay. Got it. As under partnership, again, we have several classifications depending upon the constitution, how many partners they would want and how they would want to be operational. How many sleeping partners, how many active partners. Okay. So partnership, and one other aspect is also going in for a private limited company. Okay. So registering a company as well as registering this one, there's also a one-person company that can be formulated as well. And another aspect is limited liability partnership, where the liability of the firm is actually defined, and post which they actually, again, registration again is like mandatory there, and they have to, they basically define their liability. So these are the three major classification which one should be aware of. And what are the documentations that generally would have to go into, and again they're actually also governed by different laws. Okay, so a partnership firm would be again regulated by the Partnership Act, whereas the companies would be governed by the Companies Act 2013. That would be the recent amendment as well.
Yeah.
So formulating a private limited company would have its own set of regulations, where like a person will have to like the directors, the number of directors. Again, there is also a classification there, where like one being a resident can also become a director, and a non-residential Indian NRI can also become a director of a company. And those things are like specifically dealt under the Companies Act as well.
Got it. Okay. So if in case anybody is looking at registering an organization, there are multiple ways that they can do it. And I'm sure whom should they approach, Abhilesh? So if they want to now register, is it a CA or is it a lawyer? Whom do they approach and where do they take it from?
Okay, my honest opinion on that is always going to be like they definitely have to approach a chartered accountant, a company secretary, as well as a lawyer. So all three of us would definitely work in consensus, and then we see a logical end.
Got it. So if in case
of corporate affairs, sorry, Kripalini.
Go ahead, Abhilesh.
Yeah, for registration of a company, like MCA is what we call it, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So that's where like one will have to like submit their application with respect to registration of a private limited company. There are certain protocols that needs to be followed, and once those requirements are actually met, then the company is actually registered,
established.
And each of the constitution, the constitution of the firm or the company really matters when it comes to any adjudication with respect to let's say starting from a claim as against the company or a firm up to like a dissolution. So everything is like entirely different. So
Got
we
it.
could maybe like deal with it in detail if need be.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you, Abhilesh. I think, you clearly gave an outline, at least for the listeners, saying there are three different types. You make a choice depending on what kind of an organization you're setting up. And it's always advisable sit with a CA or with a lawyer and a combination of all three people, a CA, CS, and a lawyer, and make a choice very clearly, because once you've registered, I think that stays for your organization. So be very sure of what you're doing. And in case you need more details, we can have further discussion on this. I have one last question to ask. Yes, go ahead, Sushant, if you had something to
Sorry,
share.
can I add to what Abhilesh said?
You can, Sushant.
So, with in adding to what Abhilesh said, I think just a few pointers maybe people can keep in mind to choose between the various organizations that Abhilesh pointed out. I mean, previously we had only the sole proprietorship, what we call a partnership firm or a company. Now, over the last 10 years, the law has developed to include the LLPs as well as the OPC. That's the one-person company which Abhilesh was talking about. Now,
Got it.
we need to understand that some of these combine the advantages of some forms of entities and some disadvantages as well. So what a person needs to understand, I'll be quick about this so that you have a very basic idea, so that accordingly you can decide which you would want to register or create.
Yeah.
A sole proprietorship has and why I'm sorry, why I'm taking this time is to explain these concepts is I notice people very loosely using the word I have a company, it's a private limited. So in reality,
Yeah.
it may be a sole proprietorship or a partnership firm, but they assume it's a company.
Company.
Or they
Got
say,
it.
in my company, it's the family, my father, mother, me, wife, sister, brother, we are the shareholders. Therefore, it's a firm. These concepts are
Yeah.
very interchangeably and loosely used, probably because people are not aware. So I'll quickly run through just like I did
It
with
would
the
be nice. Yeah.
intellectual property. If I'm not,
No. Please go ahead,
speaking. Yeah.
Sushant. It's
Uh,
important for us to know all this.
yeah, so I just thought I'll quickly run through. So sole proprietorship is like the name suggests, one person, and it is not different from the proprietor himself. In the sense, it is not a different entity in law. So if I say my proprietorship is called Sushant and Co. So just because it says Sushant and Co. in the agreement of Sushant and Co. owes the loan to the bank does not mean the bank cannot come and attach my house and sell it if I default on the loan payable to the bank. So
Yes.
sole proprietorship and sole proprietor are in law one and the same.
One and the
People
same.
should not get confused. So it can be interchangeable. Just because I make only one person a party in a case or anything does not mean that it's in my company's name I am not liable. No, if it's a sole proprietorship, it doesn't matter. Partnership firm, the age-old traditional concept of a partnership firm is unlimited liability, in the sense you need minimum two people obviously to form a partnership firm, like Abhilesh was saying, managing partner, sleeping partner, etc. The old act, if I'm not wrong, put a cap of 20 people. If Abhilesh, please correct me if I'm wrong. 20 people was the cap put, and here the advantages, of course, you're pooling in resources of many more people in running your firm, not company, firm, and it can or cannot be registered. The difference being, if you're registered, like Abhilesh said, you can also enforce your rights in a contract. But if you're not registered, you cannot enforce your rights in a contract, because there's a bar for that under the Partnership Act itself. And your liability is not limited to the assets of the partnership firm, but it can be up to the extent of all your personal assets of all the partners. And all partners act as something called, it's called a doctrine of implied agency in commerce, where a partner, when he's acting for on behalf of the firm, is also acting for on behalf of all the other partners. Need not necessarily be authorized as such. So if three of us are running a partnership firm, I go and do some business.
Yeah.
And somebody comes and says, "Look, your business partner had come and done this, so please, honor the obligations."
Yeah.
You are bound to do it.
Bound to do it as a
That
partner.
is as a partner of the firm. So that is the traditional concept of a partnership, which now has sort of developed into what we commonly known as LLPs, a limited liability partnership, which has the advantage of a limited liability, which is limited to the assets of the firm. And here the firm is a separate entity in law. So I like, for example, in a traditional firm, I can file a case against the firm and all the partners. All the partners have to be made parties because they're all liable personally. That's not the case in a LLP.
Got it.
And in LLP, I act, if a partner acts as an agent, like the same example, if we are an LLP,
Yeah.
my acts as an agent bind only the LLP firm, not the other partners.
Got it.
So these are a few concepts. Then company, private limited, public limited. Again, company is a separate legal entity in law. It's a legal person, not an actual person. So it's a legal entity. It's a fiction of law for facilitating easy functioning, and people can choose to create a company when they want to raise more capital, or expand their operations, diversify the business and all, economies of scale, etc. Which and the difference, people may ask, what's the difference between a company and a LLP?
Correct.
The difference would be, in an LLP you have far less statutory and regulatory filings and compliances, etc., as opposed to a company which has far more
where you have to meet the directors and
a
everything has to be
lot of statutory and regulatory compliances under tax laws and under the company law, labor laws, etc. So the thing is, once you're registered, there are much more regulations you're bound by, as opposed to when you're not registered.
Got it.
Also, that one person company is a very new concept. It's I would say, it's a nebulous concept. It is formulated by the Companies Act 2013, where it gives the person an option to create a company in his own name. So now, if I want to avail the benefits of a company, I did not, and I'm an entrepreneur, I need not wait or depend for one more person to join me, because for a private limited company you need minimum 2. For a public limited company, you need minimum 7 people as the initial promoters. An OPC, that's not required. One person by himself can start, and so that's the advantage. So you get the advantage of a company, again, separate legal entity, so limited liability.
Got it.
Things like that. So I don't want to delve deeper.
No, I think that's fantastic information, Sushant. So if anybody out there is trying to set up this kind of an organization, now there's enough pointers and rule of thumb that they can follow to just make sure that they know, okay, what is the direction that they can take. So I have one last question before I take the rest of the questions which the people have put in here. So if I may ask, I think this question is something that I got quite a lot in the even when I put up the stories and I asked people to comment and tell us what questions do they have. I think one thing that they clearly specified is, during this pandemic, there is a lot of trauma to a common man goes through related to loans. Can you tell us more about loan recoveries and how can a common man benefit from it? Either of you can take the question.
Okay.
After you, Sushant. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks. So, as in, what do you mean by how can a common man benefit from loan recoveries? As in, what would you want me to?
No, if in case, like, now there's any kind of loan recoveries that's going to be happening, and if there's anything to do with loans per se, I know that now the government has given all of us three months duration that we can skip and we can whatever. So what are the implications of this? And if there's a loan recovery that's happening, right, it's a lot of trauma and stress that they really go through. So if you can talk about, what is the process around this and how does this happen?
So I'll be restricting my answer to loans that are disbursed by banks and financial institutions, because there are a lot of other loans also which take place between persons. So usually there's a loan agreement or something called as a credit facility agreement, etc., signed between the bank and the borrower, and the terms of that govern all the aspects of the loan repayment and what is given as collateral. Now it's we need to know, when we sign these bank documents, there are it's voluminous, so we tend to just sign and we are happy that the money is credited to our accounts. So we tend to ignore the nitty-gritties or the fine details. So the devil lies in the details, because those agreements will clearly specify what it is that the bank can do in the case of a default or delay in the payment by the borrower. So usually sometimes properties are secured by loans are secured by properties, immovable or movable. And if there is a default on my end, the banks notify me, and 90 days my account is outstanding, I'm not I'm a defaulter, then they classify my account as an NPA, a non-performing asset. There is some proposal now before the government and the RBI to expand that term to 180 days.
Hmm.
So that's anyway a change in the law which may
Yeah.
happen. So 90 days is the norm. So
Hmm.
in case I don't repay even after 90 days and I'm classified as an NPA, then the bank can do whatever it can within the framework of the law, of course, to recover the money from it. See, we need to understand
Correct.
the trauma of the common man, yes, who's unable to pay his loan. But what is the source of the funds for the banks?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
is our money. It is
Yes.
the thousands of depositors who have entrusted their money with the banks, which is a source of funds for the bank to disburse loans to the borrowers. So it's not that
Correct.
the banks are doing some draconian activities or something, something of that nature. They are basically doing their job towards their
Job.
customers
Yeah.
and the depositors who have entrusted their money. In most cases, life
Correct.
savings. And India, even today, runs on many people invest in FDs and put their money in their SP accounts.
Yeah.
So that money is what the bank is seeking to recover when it goes to enforce its security, that is the
Yes.
property mortgage. So all this has to happen within the framework of the law. There is no question of it. There are two legislations governing this. One is called the short form is the SARFAESI Act. Basically, it talks of how securities can be enforced by a bank in event of default by borrowers. And
Got
there's a
it.
various procedures. I'm not going to go into that. People
Sure.
will get bored and
No problem,
prolong the
Sushant.
discussion. So
Yeah.
they have to follow the procedure under that act for loans which are above 20 lakhs. Default is about 20 lakh.
Okay.
Otherwise, they can go to the regular civil courts to enforce the amount. And also, SARFAESI Act that gives them the right to attach the property and sell it with the help of police protection, which they can get from the local jurisdictional magistrate or the tahsildar, depending on which area the property lies in. So banks have
Okay.
all these rights. And even for movable properties, sometimes if people may or may not notice when they take loans, let's say on their for working capital requirements, which is a very usual thing people do. They may not have offered any collateral in the terms of their house or their the company's office or any company asset.
Correct.
But usually it will contain clauses which says bank will have rights over all the book debts, stocks, and other properties, movable, immovable, in existence and not goods which are manufactured or to be manufactured.
Yeah.
All these. So
Anything
basically, it's
future.
a very
Yeah.
anything future. So it's a very comprehensive, exhaustive
Yeah.
definition which basically says, look, I have the right to take over anything and everything to
If
recover
you
the
don't pay
amount.
the loan.
If you don't pay the loan, to recover the amount due to me. And to
Got
prevent
it.
various frauds, there are various legislations also. Like your that's why various legislations to protect fraud, like the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and all that, to prevent fraudulent transactions which are done to defraud the creditors and things like that. But please keep in mind, whatever it is, the banks have to follow the rule of law.
Rule of law. Yeah.
Have a right. If the bank is enforcing its security and you have a grievance, you have the right to move the court, which is called Debt Recovery Tribunal, or DRT for short.
Okay.
Borrowers have the right to move that, and nobody can be dispossessed by the bank, irrespective of what the right is, without
Yes.
following the due process of law. So that is
Got it.
essential prerequisite. It's a mandate. So everybody has their rights and duties, both common man, the borrower, as well as the banks, and everybody needs to follow the act within the framework of the law.
Got it, Sushant.
So therefore, your question on the, specifically answering that, unfortunately, the pandemic has resulted in a lot of distress to everybody, economic and other emotional distress. But it's always better that we, as a practical suggestion would be to be in good relation with your banking authorities from whom you have availed the loan. Be in constant touch with them, to talk about how you can protect, or give us something known as an OTS, or a one-time settlement proposal, in terms of which you can rework your loan obligations with the bank and ensure that it's repaid without any coercive action
Going through anything.
without going through all this hassle of
Got
property attachment and sale, police coming to your house to attach a property, all those things.
Got it, Sushant.
I
Got it.
think that should cover, from my aspect. Abhilesh, I'm sure would have
Abhilesh, anything from your side that you want to add to this?
Prashant has quite exhaustively covered.
Sure.
So just to maybe add on, just for the namesake, I would say. So what I would say is once the loan account is classified as an NPA,
Yeah.
thereafter the bank would initiate a next action, that is like symbolic possession. Okay, if in case of a immobile asset. So what happens is, as per law, they have to manually send out a notice. So this is what is like a really crucial period. Once you receive the first notice, the borrowers will have to act immediately. Okay. So there have been instances where like a loan has been availed by the landlord and the tenant is in physical possession of the house. So if in case we were to see, okay, fine, if the tenant's interest is again protected, yes, his interests are also protected as under the law, and they themselves can also approach the debt recovery tribunal. So DRT would exclusively deal with all of these loans as such, which would cross more than 20 lakhs. So a debt recovery tribunal cannot be approached in the event if it's a personal loan. Okay. So personal loan would fall under the category of a civil recovery, for which they'll have to approach a civil court.
Civil court. Okay. Got it.
I think more or less there has to be minimum of 2 communications as under law, as under prescribed under the law. And once you are in receipt of any legal notice, definitely do approach a lawyer. I think he should be able to guide you through the next process, because classification of NPA, where there have been instances where the classification of NPA has also been abruptly done without following the due process of law. As Sushant also mentioned, that mandatory 90 days period is very crucial.
Yeah.
So that 90 days where the borrower should not have made any payment at all. Only under such circumstances, like a bare minimum of 3 months, if there is no payment into the loan account, under such circumstances, the bank would be entitled to classify your loan account as a non-performing asset. Otherwise, if in case, let's say, like you make some partial payment, it cannot be classified as a non-performing asset.
Got it. I think that's some great information, Abhilesh and Sushant, that you guys shared. And I'm sure it's going to be helping a lot of people out there in case they're struggling with loans currently and they really are figuring out ways of how to go about with it. There's quite a lot of other questions that we had to discuss. But I think in the interest of time, I would request, if it's okay with you, we will do another session where, we will continue with some more questions which is asked in the stories earlier from people who are a part of the community.
Sure.
However, from people who've joined this session, there's a lot of questions which has come up. So if you may permit, I'm going to ask you those questions. So you can choose who wants to take up whichever question. I missed asking Abhishek Patak's question earlier. So he had asked saying, what due diligence should be taken into account while hiring a contractor for an IT firm?
Come again, Palini, sorry.
What due diligence should be taken into account while hiring a contractor for an IT firm?
Due diligence, specifically, I'm kind of like, we really cannot understand the repercussions of the nuances of the IT firm as such.
Okay.
Will you be able to answer this, Sushant?
I don't know. See, due diligence in the sense, it's what do you mean? I mean, it's not like we have a national repository of all the cases pending or disposed of a particular person. I think that may be the concern of Mr. Patak. As in, what could be, so there is no national repository as such, because we, I think, get questions like this. How do I assess if there is a case pending or not, or a criminal investigation pending or not? I mean, as of today, I don't think there's any national repository which has all this information in one database, or a state-wise database also, for you to assess. Otherwise, usually the due diligence that happens when usually when companies take over companies, or when there is a big organization which is availing the services of a smaller organization, they say, look, to maintain our brand name and quality, etc., they do due diligence in the sense they audit they request for access to your financial statements. They go through your compliances. Have you complied with all the relevant laws like labor law, employment laws, company law, taxations, etc.? So these are some the due diligence are usually done in takeovers, not for contract specific services. It may not do. Maybe more than a lawyer, somebody like a PI, that's a private investigator, or somebody may be able to
support on this.
support,
And
but I'm not
yeah.
sure of that also. So please don't hold me. And
No, yeah,
shoot,
and I think what we would also suggest is for Mr. Patak, because I think this needs more clarity in the information that you've shared. I've tagged both these gentlemen on the post that I put up, and I will again re-tag them in case you want to reach out to them personally and have a discussion. I'm sure they will be obliged to share the information that they have.
Yeah.
So I'm making that point on behalf of you guys. Thank you for that. Yeah,
Thank you.
and yeah, there's quite a lot of good comments which has come in from Karishma, from Aishwarya, from Anusha, from Abhishek Jayan, from Advocate Navneet, from Mahesh, from Indra Pai, from Sunita Pai. I think everybody is trying to say that the session has been extremely good,
Thank you.
and a lot more people, in fact, as well. There's also one more question from Nritya Kishore saying we need. I think she had asked saying when do I have to do a will? We clearly answered that in the beginning
Yeah.
of the session, so she will be able to find that answer. Let me look for the other questions that's there. And I think Shashi Srinivas, there was a question related to employee bond. I think this needs more clarity and information exactly saying, what are we trying to talk about? I would suggest that, you share more inputs on that and talk to each of them personally where they can, get into the details and talk to you on that. There's another question which is asked from Lalit Braganza again, saying, please cover non-compete agreement also. Is it still legal to sign?
Okay. I think yeah. I can quickly
Sure.
do that. Abhilash, with your
Yes,
permission.
sure, Sushant.
I'm sorry, I just
Take the
sort of
lead.
usurped that question. So, non-compete covenants are basically a clause in an agreement which
Yeah.
basically restrains you, as the name suggests, from competing or entering into another conflicting or competing interest or business. Which would compete or conflict with the business of the company in which you're employed. Now, there are two kinds of non-compete agreements that can be employer-employee or between two independent entities like companies. Now, like a franchisee, supplier, distributor, anything, or two independent contractors. Now, for example, an employer-employee, the non-compete agreement as a covenant as such would be valid only during the subsistence of the agreement, irrespective of what the agreement says. The employment agreement may say that even after 1 year of termination, you're not supposed to join the employment of any em- uh, employer or company who is in a potential conflict with our business, etc., etc. So that would not necessarily, I mean, that would not definitely apply to an employee, because we have a fundamental right to practice any trade, profession, occupation of our choice, so long as it's lawful. So
Yeah.
an employee cannot be bound by the non-compete covenant after the termination of the contract, as opposed to he can be bound by it during the subsistence of the contract for obvious reasons. Otherwise, as an employee, I am going to, let's say, work for two competitors. I'll not take any names, X and Y. I'm drawing salaries from both. Now, if Y is paying me more, I may just pass on some information of X to Y so that Y can, just take over the market
Got it.
and throw X out of business. So during subsistence, non-compete is valid, enforceable. During, I mean, after
Yeah.
the force against the employee. Now, such that also
Entities. Yeah.
broadly governs how my personal understanding of the judgments of our honorable court would be that with these restrictions, but then on this is there out there. But this is my again my
Lalit Braganza mentioned he has got something that they've understood. So you might
really
not,
usurped this,
you
so I
had
don't know if
anything
No,
Abhilash
about
I
wants
think
to.
the Sushant again has covered. So the only
Got it.
ground is which wherein like parties have actually ended up litigating pertaining to this. The court's only opinion as throughout has always been the reasonableness. So what is the reasonable time, as well? It also depends upon the business as well as the jurisdiction in which they are operating. For example, let's say a company is operating within, let's say, like only looking at South India. A person doing similar business in
In the
North
north.
India or East India, like they are still permitted to, like the
Got it.
non-compete clauses would not come into like immediate effect. Okay. So non-compete again, the sole ground the courts again, I would want to repeat it, is reasonableness. If it is within a reasonable sphere, in that event, the courts do say yes, within that reasonable period, you're not supposed to have a competing business, which would in fact cause a lot of loss and
Got
hindrance
it.
to the previous organization. That is
Yeah,
all that I
thank
would
you.
like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Abhilesh. And for all of you who've joined out there, if you've liked the session and if you've liked all the information that Abhilesh and Sushant have shared, please give them a thumbs up. Let them know that you've liked the session. And as per a few requests which also came out today, I think we will request you guys to give us another session on another Tune In Tuesday where we can discuss furthermore, because we did have a lot more questions to cover, a lot more questions which was also asked, and I think there's enough information that we can gather from these sessions, at least basic information for us to know, saying not to be dumb and not to be ignorant, just start understanding, saying how law really functions, right? So one last question before we end this session to Abhilesh and to Sushant. Abhilesh, if you want to take this question first, is a lot of us nowadays I've seen on social media, people tend to put up a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of ranting, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of information, in fact, which has also been put up, good information, right information, wrong information. So how was social media conceived in the court of law? What really happens out here?
So one has to be like extremely cautious, because like what we put out on social media could you're as well like equally accountable for what we put out on the social media. So one cannot be having a very loose approach while posting anything on social media. It would still one, let's say, any defamatory statement that is being put up, the person can still be held accountable, and they would
Got
be
it.
dealt with the due process of law. So the information, the kind of information, if not for, see, the law would basically not have any differentiation for anything that is being said, either let it be in person or through social media. If it would incite any violence, if it would incite any crime, yes, the person would be held accountable. They would be
Got it.
punishable as under the Indian Penal Code, as well as like the Information Technology Act. So
Yeah.
Information Technology Act was like brought as early as like 2012. So where like certain acts have been held accountable and the person is actually punishable as well.
Got
So
it.
kindly be aware of what you post. Don't
Yeah.
incite any crime. Don't incite any communal riots. So all these aspects, you would be equally liable for criminal prosecution for what we post on online.
Yeah, especially knowingly or unknowingly, I think a message triggers us to forward something to somebody. No, you don't know why are you reposting it, and you do it and you become a part of it. So always be cautious on what you really are putting out there, because like Abhilesh clearly mentioned, it is going to be under the scrutiny of the court of law, right? So
One
if
standard
something,
example, Kripalani, maybe like I would want to add here
sure.
is like how Tamil Nadu government in fact came in quite harsh on the WhatsApp group admins. So any person who used to share any defamatory or any controversial messages, anything pertaining to, including at the present scenario, maybe like some false information pertaining to COVID-19 is also accountable, and the person would be liable for a criminal prosecution as well. So Tamil Nadu government, in fact, did a huge tax. They did, like, they actually came down quite heavily upon the WhatsApp
Got
group
it.
admins. Not only the person who was sharing the information, but the person on which group who was owning the group, he was also held accountable for sharing of such information. So always
Got
be
it.
quite sensitive, like to all these aspects. Be
Yeah.
aware. Don't share false messages.
Yeah, something that you're not
Ensure
very
you double
sure
check
of.
it.
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much, Abhilesh. Sushant, did you have anything to add
Yeah,
to it? Yeah.
I just want to add, if I may. So, what people need to realize is that there is no difference just because you put it out on a digital or an online platform. You're
Yeah.
as liable and accountable for your actions on a digital platform as you would be, say, on a physical platform.
Got it.
So,
Yeah.
we have to, like Abhilesh rightly said, verify what it is that we're posting or sharing or discussing about, because nowadays it's a very what to say, very, it's a prevalent situation where on social media instant judgments are passed, opinions are formed without
Yeah.
understanding the consequences, or the, because please understand, there's a system in place, there are laws in place, there are people who are there to protect it and enforce it. That's your the courts, the police authorities, and all, and the other authorities. So we must give them the time to follow the due process set in law and arrive at the decision. Till then, I mean, as citizens, we must exercise some restraint uh, while coming to posting or sharing on social media. That does not mean we completely switch off and sit at home. Well, some restraint, reasonable. It all boils down to reasonableness. So people need to understand that and realize that digital or physical doesn't matter. The law is the law, and you're equally accountable, and you have equal rights. I mean, both work. Rights.
Got it. Got it, Sushant. Yeah, thank you so much for all the information that both of you shared today. And if it is okay, I think if you're okay with the 7th of July, if we can meet again on the next Tuesday. Yeah, the next Tuesday, if both of you are okay with it. So we will continue with our discussion, because I think there's quite a lot of more questions which has also come up, and people have pinged me personally as well, saying, if I can ask that question, because probably for whatever reasons they don't want to mention their name and tag along to it. If you have any such questions, guys, please go ahead and send me a direct message on Project Gyan. I will keep the questions anonymous. Like the questions that was asked earlier were all anonymous questions from the people in the community. We will ask the same questions and get answers for them from both of these gentlemen who joined us today. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you back again on the 7th of July. Thanks, Abhilesh. Thanks, Sushant, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kripa.
Thank you. Thank you. See you all on the next Tuesday again. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.